Hi, you all. My name is Anne, and I have to tell you right off the bat, I love how you're doing this training. I love that some of you are together, and then you're watching things on a screen at the same time. People are so trying to figure out what to do to kind of be together and not able to be together fully. So I just love the way you're doing this. I want you to know I love this region and this part of the country and this part of Young Life. I'm from Riverside. So I will tell you the best Young Life leaders ever in the history of everything are in Riverside. But I love all the places that this covers. I love the desert cities. You guys have Carrie Sad. How lucky are you? You're so blessed. I love Orange County. I love San Diego. I wish I could be with you all there and know you, but I know your leaders, and they are some of the best in the country. They're wise. They know everything. Listen to everything they say. They're so good. Christy Fox asked me to talk with you all about trauma, and I said I was excited to do that, which I know is kind of weird that I'd be excited to talk about trauma and Young Life work. But first of all, I would do anything Christy ever asked me to do. And then I'm excited about it for two reasons. One, I really think that you all can do a lot to help kids and leaders and each other in the area of traumatic stress and being trauma impacted. And I think the second thing is I want to help increase your confidence. It's an area that we feel like it's so out of what we know to do, things that we know to do for it. And I want your confidence to grow. So my hope is for those couple of things in this time. I think you can do a lot, and I want you to feel a little more confident about this area in ministry. I was thinking about the history of this conversation, and a few years ago, more than a few years ago, my phone started to ring. And so I serve in the part of Young Life that deals with some of our crisis. And my phone would ring. Sometimes that happens during the camping summer. You guys call the red card, and we have a team that helps with that. But sometimes my phone rings, and I started to hear this over and over again. Wow, I am hearing kids share really hard situations that they're in, younger and younger. Wow, this is hard on me. I feel tired. I feel exhausted. I feel like this is taking a toll on me, just personally, what I'm hearing. This feels new. It feels like things are getting dialed up. Wow, kids are more anxious, more depressed, more medicated than I've ever seen them. I think kids are worn out and vulnerable in their lives. I would hear all of this and also hear a sense of fear kind of creeping in around what we're hearing. This feeling of, I think I'm over my head in what is being shared and my ability to hold that and handle that. If I know that they have trauma because of it and I have trauma because I'm hearing it, it's really difficult. I'm thinking about a day that a Young Life leader or a staff person would spend with kids, and they would hear all the things that made them say that. They would hear really hard things from younger and younger kids. And then you may run into someone who's a donor or a parent or a school community person, and they'll say something to you like, I love that thing that you do with kids, that thing with the youth. I love what you do. Youth ministry is so important. It is so great what you do. And that's weird to put those two things together, like the hard things you hear, and then someone saying, that thing you do is so nice. It's so wonderful. It's so good for our youth. When you hear those two things in the same day, that feels a little bit weird. But you know what? I think that when you're a Young Life leader, you are likely the first to hear what's going on in a kid's life. If it's in their personal life with their family, with their friends, their substance use, any violence that goes on with them or they are exposed to, their sexuality, many things. A Young Life leader is the first one to hear that and hold that. So it's important, but at the same time, I really understand that this sense of fear can creep in. Like you think, gosh, this story maybe can't get any worse. And then we have a year like we've had this year, and it absolutely can. It can get a little bit harder. I feel like Young Life leaders are close to the fire, and it just keeps the temperature keeps getting dialed up. all the time. So I want to start with one thought about all that, that I think is a faithful thought to start with. To remember that Jesus said to us, in this world, you will have trouble. You will. But don't be afraid, because I've overcome the world. I feel like it's a faithful thought to listen to Jesus, because if we feel like this trauma is misplaced, it shouldn't be here, it's not right, it's not just, yes, that's all true. And Jesus said, in this life, you will have trouble. You will. And it's not a little bit of trouble. It's a lot of trouble. But stay close to me. I've overcome the world. Don't be afraid. So I want to start with that thought as an umbrella for us, to stay close to Jesus, just even internally with some of the things that give us tension on this topic. Okay, so there's a lot of ways to start talking about traumatic stress, trauma, and some ways to talk about it are to give some gnarly statistics on how many kids are exposed and have traumatic stress, how many adults do that. Kids carry trauma, adults carry trauma. Those statistics are true, the numbers are big. The other way to start talking about it is to say, let me tell you about how trauma impacts your brain or impacts your body as you carry that stress. All of that is true too. But I thought this time I wanted to start with kind of a working definition of trauma for you, that I think can apply to all of us. So the definition is this. Trauma happens when something has happened, an event, that exceeds your ability to cope. So let me say that again. The definition of trauma is something that's happened that exceeds your ability to cope. Our ability to cope, a person's ability to cope. Now, if you think about what the virus has done to our world, all of us have felt like this is a little bit outside of what I can handle. And yes, all of us are experiencing traumatic stress at times from that. What that definition means is that the things you do to normally cope in life, your strategies, this is outside of that. Everything that you would know to do that would help with the stress, with trauma, with anxiety along the way, this is outside of that. And that defines a traumatic event or something that has a traumatic impact on you. So with that makes it easy for us to understand that everybody carries traumatic stress. And another way to think about this definition is that if you witness something that's traumatic, there's a coming apart that happens on our interior selves, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. It's all too much. Happens, like, let's use the example of a car accident, that sometimes the trauma of what you just saw, it's too much. It's really, it blows your mind a little bit. And there's this coming apart that happens. And the recovery from that is this natural process of coming back together. I want to say to you that the more I've learned about this, the less afraid I am of the process. I really believe that God is about repairing those things that on the inside have left a wound, have left this coming apart, feeling at loose ends, like things are not all connected in my life. Everything's disrupted. The more and more I learn about this, the more I think God immediately gets about repairing that work. Okay, so that's a working definition to think about trauma, but here's another one that might be helpful. Another way to think about it is the same way that we think about concussions. So if you know that someone has gotten hit in the head with a ball at a sporting event, or headed the ball as a soccer player, and you look at them and you say, "Are you okay?" And they look back at you and they go, "Yeah, I feel okay." And you go, "Okay, you look all right." Off you go. On to the next thing. What we learned decades ago, it's taken us actually decades to figure this out, but what we learned about concussions is that someone can get hurt in their head and they look at you and they say, "I'm fine." And you look at them and you go, "You look fine." Okay. But what we learned over time is the impact of that. You know, you think about, there's some older people in this group listening, you think about the boxers that over time have a hard time communicating and stringing a sentence together because of all those blows to the head. We didn't know that was happening. The NFL head injury lawsuits that are happening from all that damage that got done. Parents that now say, I'm not really going to let my young kid play football or even soccer because of what can happen. They're hesitant because they know that has an impact. It's a little bit similar to a traumatic impact. So on the inside, something has happened that you witnessed or experienced, and there's this coming apart that I explained to you, and you look at someone and you go, are you okay? And they go, yeah, I'm okay. And then you say, okay, well, you look okay. Okay, off you go into the next thing. And we learned that we needed to treat concussions, and now we know we need to treat trauma a little differently and be careful with people. That analogy only goes so far, but some of the things that help with a traumatic brain event, slow down, rest, not so much time on screens, being watchful and careful with that person for a little while are the things that really help not to re-injure. Some of those can be said about treating people that carry around traumatic stress too. But like I said, it only goes so far in those ways. But if those things are helpful in how you think about this, I think they've been helpful to me and to some other people in thinking about how we hold our awareness of trauma. Okay. I wanted to move on and talk about young life work and how we deal with people carrying trauma. And I thought there's a number of ways to do it, but I thought, you know, we have this lingering question sometimes. And the question in young life for many, many years, this is not recent, for many, many years has been, we need a therapist at camp to help deal with the trauma that we're hearing. We need a therapist attached to every single area, like a staff person that's a therapist. People have brought that question up. And I think today, when I talk to you about this, what I wanted to do is try and answer that question and talk a little bit in terms of the role of a therapist and a counselor and what they do, and then the role of a young life leader and what they do, and have you see kind of in a boundaried way where our spot is to deal with the trauma that we're encountering. That's my plan. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the role of a therapist. And I can imagine that there are some therapists, LCSWs, people with a mental health background that may be involved in this leader training. And so this is one way. This is not everything, but it's one way to talk about what a therapist does. And I know you guys bring some expertise to that. And I do too. So I'm a trained marriage and family therapist also. And as I've watched over the years, either in my own practice or just in communities, I'm seeing therapy be this. This is one way to describe it. Therapists educate and often diagnose. They can give names for what's going on and educate around it. Educate a family and educate a community about relational things, emotional things, psychological things, trauma. There's an education component. Then therapists also treat those things in sessions. So they get specialized in certain things, EMDR, brain spotting, many different therapies, cognitive behavioral therapies. Sometimes they refer out for drug therapies. Talk therapy is what they do in their offices. I think because of some of our rising tension about trauma, therapy has become kind of a big bucket. A lot gets thrown in there. And some of it should be there, but not all of it should be there. But therapy is like, there's been a lot of gravitation toward that. I think some because of the fear of what we're hearing and the tension it causes us, which is fine. I think therapy has a specific function. I think that it definitely treats targeted things that are going on. It's important. I also think that there are a lot of people that are interested in this, that want to be treating therapists. And I would just say, do it. You know, the world needs good Christian therapists. Every community that I see needs more really good Christian therapists. So if God stirs your heart to that and calls you to it, do it with your whole life. It is a worthy thing to pursue. I think it comes alongside ministry in a really good way. But I also think that it's expensive and not everyone will be able to access it in our communities. And even so, at times that I've said, hey, I want to be part of paying for someone's counseling or whatever, they might not always be ready for it. They don't always pursue it. Maybe they go once or twice. A family might go once or twice. But they might not always be ready to enter into that kind of work that happens, that hard work that happens session after session. Okay. Those are some thoughts on the role of a therapist. I want to talk with you about the role of a young life leader as it relates to traumatic stress, traumatic impact on young people. A young life leader. As I started to read about trauma and more recent research, the most important research on how to help people with trauma says over and over again, it says that the impact of one caring adult on a young person's life is on the whole the healthiest thing to help repair traumatic stress, traumatic impact. So the research says again, over and over, one caring adult in a kid's life is the thing that has the highest impact. So as a young life person, this gets my attention. And I go, what? What do you mean? And you begin to read about that the research says one caring adult is the thing that makes the biggest impact. So let me just take this piece apart really quick for you. What you get with a young life leader who is the one caring adult, maybe, oftentimes, maybe one of a few, but one caring adult, a young life leader, is you get an invitation to something. You invite kids. You invite kids to be part of life with Jesus, but you also invite kids to be part of whatever gathering you're creating. If it's camp, if it's Young Life Club, if it's campaigners, there's an invitation. Kids are known by name. Over and over again, that we know that makes a huge difference, that someone knows your name. So let me say to you that all of these things are still impactful virtually. Knowing kids' names, reaching out to them, making sure that they're included, being known in that way. There's a welcome when someone joins virtually or in person. There's a welcome. There's a recognition, and I'm glad you're here. Belonging. The sense of belonging that comes from one adult caring about a kid. So a kid shows up, and it's not just that they know your name or they've been invited, but they show up and they say, oh, you're with me. There's this sense of relationship that you belong here because we're together. You're going to sit by me. We're going to be together. I'm glad you're here. Come and be with me. Belonging is significant. Community is significant. You know, when kids begin to share, even about trauma in their lives, there's a sense of universality is what they call it and what they study, that you're not that different from me. I'm like you and you're like me. Our stories might be a little bit different, but we're the same. And the universality of carrying something hard is healing. And that happens in campaigners, it happens in camp, and it happens one-on-one in conversation. Being tracked. This is something I feel like leaders are so good at. They know the cadence of communication with kids. They know when they haven't responded to some sort of social media reach out, when they haven't texted back, when they haven't called back. They know when they drop off the radar. They're so close. Being tracked in life is a super healing thing. Let me tell you, this is my favorite thing recently that I've learned. It's a new kind of term in psychology they're talking about. It's called feeling felt. I love that term. It happens when someone tracks you in your life and says, what happened in that conversation with that friend? What happened at practice? What happened at that party? What happened to you at school? Whatever it is. Someone says, hey, I was thinking about that. And as you're tracking them, I was thinking about that. And I wanted to ask you, what happened there? A kid begins to tell you their experience. And a leader responds with, I'd feel that way too. I would feel exactly that way. In fact, that would make me angry too. Yeah, I can imagine you feel that way. What they're studying that does is that helps a young person to trust their own feelings, to trust that what they were feeling is true and right. And they've captured it in that phrase that I love, feeling felt. That is an enormously healing thing for a kid carrying traumatic impact, anxiousness, depression, any kind of mental health thing, feeling, felt, and being tracked. All of these things, so this is my long explanation to say the presence of one caring adult contributes in all of these ways to the emotional stability of a kid. That's what you want to do with someone who's carrying the impact of trauma in their life, is contribute to their emotional stability and their healing. Okay, here's some other things. Just quickly about trauma research and the role of a young life leader. This could be a whole other talk, I will tell you, but what they're knowing that really impacts trauma, natural disaster, individual trauma, family trauma, all of it is three things, the three C's of trauma: calming, caring, and community. There's a lot to say about those things and what we do, but calming is the things that a young life leader does really naturally. Let's go get something to eat. Let's talk about that. Let's have a cup of coffee and let's take a walk. Let's talk about that. Those are calming things that you can encourage. Caring is listening. Tell me the whole story. I want to hear all of it. And community is inviting them in with other people that carry hard things. Or that have carried the same thing. The three C's. The other thing I just want to remind you of that Young Life does, our emphasis on music. There was recently a study for the National Institute for Health that put $20 million, this is before COVID, but $20 million into studying the impact of music on neuroscience. And they found music, all kinds of music, especially the kind that person chooses, has a huge impact on their brain and on the neuroscience of how it interacts emotionally to you. So they studied that, but they found things like breathing together and singing the same songs in rhythm is good for you. It's good for your anxiety. They saw your brain waves change when you do that. The anonymity that music provides when music is on in a room and people get invited into it and they're kind of trying to find their spot, that music is really good for your brain and your anxiety. It made me think, you all, God knew and gave us these things from the beginning. And we do them because they're what Young Life does, but they're actually really good for impacting kids impacted by trauma. Okay, there's that. Laughter, I could say a lot about that, but they know that laughing is good all around for your well-being, and it releases serotonin in your brain. So laughing has an impact on the stress of trauma. Adventure is the other thing. Anytime you invite a kid to do something they've never done before, outside of what their experience is, we do it at camp all the time, when we put kids on a ropes course or a horse or a hike, and even, the things that locally people do with kids, surfing with them, hiking with them, camping with them, out on the edges, things they haven't really done before. Anytime you do that, it teaches a kid that life is bigger than the trauma that happened to me. Life is bigger than my story. I am doing something I've never done before. It communicates to them that there's more. These are things that are normal to us in Young Life. All things that they're studying that are good. And I know you'd say, well, yeah, but everything's virtual right now. All of things, the adventure thing's challenging, but all of these things can be translated virtually. They still have a good impact. And most importantly, the transforming message of the gospel, that you tell them about the God of the universe that loves them and desires to walk with them, that is transforming to a person. When a kid walks into relationship with Jesus, the healing begins. Know that is the work that you're about. And there's really no limit or boundary to the healing in that for kids. And Jesus promises that he'll do that with all of us. Okay, so you can tell that I think a lot of the role of a Young Life leader and what you can do. If you look at the role of a therapist, I think it is very targeted and very important, and it is very hard work in a session, hour after hour. Both can work really well hand in hand. But I have felt over time that our Young Life leaders are giving away their spot. They do all this work to find kids where they are. And then sometimes they want to hand them over to a therapist who can help but the lane is so wide for what a young life leader can do. I just want you to know I am so behind that, and therapy's there in the measure that it needs to be. So I'd encourage you to not give them away too quickly and to make a lot of your spot as a young life leader. Okay, I want to say a couple other things. Well, one thing was I had, I don't know if you all know Kenny Nolan. He's our VP in charge of Young Life College. We had a great conversation recently, and he said, Ann, how can we help college students that have trauma? And I said, we'll talk about the details, kind of the ones that I'm giving you now. But I said, Kenny, the first thing you can do is have them do really good young life. Have your people do really good young life on college campuses. It's a super healing thing that God's using. So that question's getting asked there. Just really 1.5 more things for you. I want to encourage you that as in everything, we're asking Jesus to be our guide and our example. When you begin to look at the scriptures in light of the people that Jesus came into encounter with, those people that carried actually tremendous trauma, emotional trauma, psychological trauma, social trauma, physical trauma, spiritual trauma. In many ways, we would describe what they carried as traumatic for them. Jesus did not say, go and deal with the trauma first, and then we'll talk. And then you can encounter me. Then we'll talk about your walking with me, your salvation, your need for a savior. Jesus dealt with people as is, completely as is. So I'm thinking of the woman with the issue of bleeding that creeps up behind Jesus to touch his cloak. Jesus said, let me hear your whole story after the healing had happened there, not before. Sometimes I think we've got to hear the whole story before we can take them right to Jesus and trust him with that. That's not what that story tells us. The blind man who Jesus spit and made mud and healed his eyes, he didn't ask anything of him before that. He encountered him. The woman caught in adultery, he didn't condemn her. After he didn't condemn her, he said, don't sin anymore. Go and have a different life. These are such good stories and encounters with Jesus to see this happen. The woman at the well, she has a significant encounter with Jesus, and he doesn't ask her to change one single bit. He doesn't do any work. It just happens live. And I would just encourage you to take your kids right to the feet of Jesus and trust and know that he's going to deal with what they carry, and none of it is too much for him. I think the healing can go on after the encounter with Jesus, and that's your lane as Young Life leadership. So please don't dismiss this work that Jesus is doing in the world through you. I think he has got a big plan and a big footprint in the kingdom for Young Life leaders and what they're doing and how close they are to his kids. I encourage you to make a lot of it. It's a wide lane for you to run with it with your kids. So I think you guys are so smart to be getting together in the way that you are in this time of COVID. I am going to be praying for you. I wish I could be with you and talk some more about this and answer all kind of questions and just talk about it. Just get into it with you. But I just think if you have questions, just ask Christy Fox. I think she pretty much knows everything. I'm praying that God would really make a lot of this time for you, and that it would be a lot for his highest kingdom purposes. So as I know you guys are together, that's going to be my prayer for you. Thank you for listening to all my words, and I'm behind you. Go get them.